What we saw last time, we looked at television, right? We saw how the studios adapted to that. What we want to look at now is how, in essence, they've moved beyond television to some of the other things. We're going to start off with licensing, then we can look at things like DVD and streaming, and then kind of circle back to the theaters themselves, since actually most of the money isn't made in the theaters anymore. That's kind of why we're doing that guy last. So let's kind of look at this idea of licensing, because Mel Brooks is right, right? The real money is in the licensing. It's not in the movies themselves anymore. So when we were looking at this, I've got to use this marker. So we've got some studios here. That are able to license material to children's, preteens, and teens. Are essentially going to do the best. Right? And some movies license themselves better than others, right? I mean, that's just obvious. So you've got lots of movies like, like superhero movies are really, really big right now. Those lend themselves very, very well to licensing, all kinds of T-shirts and toys and Happy Meals and all this other kind of stuff. And who do you think was the first company to really come up with the idea of licensing, movie company-wise? Who does it best? Disney, right? So Disney is the first to do it, and of course the first thing that they licensed, of course, was Mickey Mouse, right? And he is licensed to watchmakers. In 1930, right? So you've got the little Mickey Mouse watch where he's got his little hands that kind of go around like that, right? And I'm sure you guys have seen those before. I actually have one. I didn't wear it today because it needs a new battery. But that's something I typically wear in the fall for some reason. I don't know why. I just typically do. But in essence, we've got this starting with watches, right? By 1935, right, just 5 years later, Mickey Mouse licensing revenue is bringing in more money than the movies. Right. So the licensing is bringing in more money than they're making from the movies that have these characters in them, right? And the profit margins on licensing can be really, really high. So you can have profit margins as high as 80% on some of this merchandise. Right? I mean, that's really high. I mean, how could you not turn that down? And of course, with Disney, we've got our theme parks, right? We have our retail stores, and we have our internet sites, right? And our TV stations. Now, how many of you guys have ever been to Disneyland or Disney World, right? It is one giant commercial. That's all that it is. It's a commercial with some rides in it. And you go there, the theme park sells the movies sell the stuff in the retail stores sell the theme parks. It's all tied together. Everything is cross-selling. Everything is selling something else, right? I mean, they made movies. Pirates of the Caribbean, which has done very well for Disney, was based upon a Disney ride, right? I mean, it's a Disney ride that you get on, and you get on this boat, and you're watching these pirates and stuff, and then you get off the ride, and you're done. The ride was old, and they said, you know what, I turn this into a movie. The whole thing ties together. Everything is tied together. Right? Well, licensing is where all this money's at. So, for example, for Disney, their theme parks began in the 1950s, of course, with Disneyland out in Anaheim. And they have expanded to Florida, Japan, France, and China. China, of course, being Hong Kong. All right. So every single year, approximately 80 million people pay for the right to spend the day in a giant shopping mall. And of course, the shopping mall only sells Disney stuff. You're never going to find anything else in there. Right? I mean, it's a fantastic marketing genius. It really is. People think they're going there for the rides, and to a degree they are. But really, it's a giant mall with some rides in it. That's what it really is. You've got another 250 million shopping in retail stores. And you see that this licensing income from all of the stuff that they put on everything, all right, it's around 6 to 8% of retail sales, bringing in about $500 million in profit. So you could have markup in licensing, I don't know. The markup can be anywhere from 10 to 20% for licensing. And these things bring in a lot of money. So for example, The Lion King, the movie, I don't know how old you guys were when this came out. It may have been before you were born, I don't remember. This thing has spawned over $1 billion in retail sales. Just this one movie. So you've got other studios that have essentially done the same thing. You've got MGM have reluctantly followed suit. All right. In essence, you almost basically kind of have to. And let's look at how MGM solved their licensing problem. Okay. It's kind of a weird looking thing. course, what is this? It's Pink Panther, right? And in essence, this is from a movie from obviously 1963. This is the original Pink Panther. And they needed a title sequence. They needed something to entertain people while they're running the credits, right? And so somebody came up with this idea, the Pink Panther here. So they have this Pink Panther running around doing all this stuff. And that guy right there is very successful. They based a cartoon on that guy, right? Pink Panther sells insulation at Home Depot and Lowe's. You go to Home Depot and Lowe's and go to the insulation section, you'll see the Pink Panther on there. It's being licensed, right? They didn't go out and try to create the Pink Panther. They just had a title sequence. And interestingly enough, of course, the licensing income from the title sequence that was made accidentally has made more money than the movie itself, right? And so we see this again and again and again with the licensing. And the stuff is literally everywhere. I mean, it really is. So here we've got, in essence, the Pink Panther, right? Basically by accident. We've got Star Wars, 1977, right? Fox Studios. Gave away the licensing rights to this movie, right? They gave it, in essence, to the to the merchandisers. MERCHAN. Let's see. So they gave it away to the merchandisers. They gave the licensing rights to Star Wars to the toy makers. Their idea was, if we give away the licensing rights to the toy makers, they will use that to help promote the movie, right? Now, you have here about $4 billion in sales, all right? And if you think of a licensing fee of about 6%, which is kind of the standard fee, you're looking at about $120 million, right, that they gave away. Obviously, they have not made that mistake again for the other movies, right? I mean, that was a really, really, really dumb thing. So to give you an idea, when Star Wars had its first run in the box office, right, and this $4 billion in sales is back in the 70s. I'm not talking today. You had about 322 million in box office, right? So a third, I mean, essentially they gave away a third of the income that they made from the box office. So studios have learned. They have seen what Disney has done. They've seen how you can make money from this. And they have learned. And in essence, so we've got, say, Warner Brothers here. They spent the 1980s acquiring cartoon heroes. All right, so they had basically DC Comics. So this gave them Batman and Superman. Right. By the early 90s, all of the major studios have licensing divisions. Right? And we know how much money we're making off of these guys, right? In terms of licensing posters, t-shirts, toys, stickers on your car, I mean, anything. I mean, all of this stuff. Interestingly enough, of course, Disney kind of remains unique in that they can basically guarantee toy sales. So toy manufacturers love working with Disney. They can essentially guarantee that they're going to have sales, right? And of course, they solidified a lot of this future toy sales when they acquired what comic book company? Marvel, right? So we've got Warner Brothers with DC, we've got Disney with Marvel. So here you have all of the things that go along with all of the Marvel movies, right? This is also another reason with all of this licensing why we see more and more studios making franchise films, is what we'll call them. So we have things like Star Wars, Transformers, Batman, Superman, Marvel comic, Avenger crap, Star Trek. Right. All of those types of things allow manufacturers to say, look, we have this steady stream, Pirates of the Caribbean. We have this steady stream of movies that are coming out. Guarantees toys, guarantees new interest every 2 to 3 years, guarantees people are coming back, all kinds of things like that. So a lot of movies, of course, don't have any licensable material. So you have this really small portion with licensable material. But these films are responsible for a lot of the money. I'll just say outsized amounts of revenue and profit. So for example, in 2000 you had movie-based characters gave you $40 billion in retail sales. Now, that's not all retail sales. That's just the retail sales that are licensable, right? So that is the Iron Man Halloween costume, right? And the Star Wars action figures, and the Batman poster, and the Superman t-shirt, right? All of that kind of stuff. And you also have video games, which are an extension of this, right? So we have like Final Fantasy, Mario Brothers, Tomb Raider, right? All of these things, as video games, we're going to turn them into movies so we can sell more stuff, turn them into t-shirts, all kinds of licensing income. Same thing for things like soundtracks. All of this cross-selling. So when we're looking at soundtracks, what studios used to do, they used to take music from the public domain, so they wouldn't have to pay anything for it, put it in the movies, and be done with it. And in essence, what we saw in 1967, you had a movie by the name of Dr. Zhivago. It actually had original music within the soundtrack. And they actually used that to help set the movie apart from other movies, and in essence to kind of have something to sell on the side, right? So you have things here like these soundtracks have the potential for lots of income. Doesn't necessarily mean that they'll always do that. Typically, you've got a movie. Their soundtrack, if it sells 10,000 copies, that's really good, right? But you've got other movies like, say, Dirty Dancing or Grease, where, in essence, the soundtracks have sold and made almost as much money as the movies themselves. So you have things like Saturday Night Fever, which is a disco movie starring John Travolta, Grease, Dirty Dancing. So Dirty Dancing is this movie that came out, I think it came out in the 80s. And I don't know how much you guys know. Every college girl when I was in college, every single girl had a copy of the soundtrack. When you go over to their house, they've got a copy of it. They might not have Saturday Night Fever, they might not have Grease, but they'd had Dirty Dancing, right? Every single one of them had it. And sometimes the income from the soundtrack can be larger than the box office. So for example, you've got the movie with George Clooney, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? This thing had about 55 million in box office. But its soundtrack $72 million. In essence, it's not the movie promoting the soundtrack. It's the soundtrack promoting the movie. You see what I'm saying? It's not the movie promoting Iron Man. It's the Iron Man characters promoting the movie. Why do you think they're coming out with a Pirates of the Caribbean #5? There's a whole bunch of crap left to sell, right? We want to sell more stuff. And if we come out with a whole nother movie, that can help sell stuff, right? That's what we're interested in. So along with licensing, we also have basically aftermarket sales. So these would be things like DVDs and streaming and VHS and all of this stuff. And initially, studios were very reluctant to do this, right? So we've already kind of seen this, right? In the past, we would have these movies in the first run theaters. They'd migrate to the neighborhood theaters. And then you're done, right? And today, in essence, what you have is, of course, you have movies showing in these multiplexes for a few weeks. And then you have DVD sales or streaming immediately following that, right? And in essence, what happens is that people will spend about 4 times as much DVD/streaming as they do on box office, right? And of course, this is only growing. It's getting larger and larger and larger. So let's kind of go back a little bit, see how we got there. We have these VHS and these DVDs that initially the studio saw as threats. And remember, we had seen movie attendance fall from, say, 90 million in 1948 to around 22 million in 1978, right? And so you have these things, VHS and DVDs, and studios are saying, look, this is a whole nother way that's going to strangle our ability to make money at the box office. Once again, they're stuck in the way of thinking that there's only one way to make money. The only way to make money is to show the thing in the box office, and that's it. Once we're done at the box office, there's nothing left to do. They don't understand the potential of VHS, DVD, to a degree now, streaming sales. I think they finally have caught on. Licensing, all of these other things that go along with it, right? So in essence, what they did is they attempted to strangle this with litigation. Okay. So what they did is they started charging about $100 per film on VHS. Okay. Now, to put that $100 into perspective, so I'm going to use 1984 as my metric here. So let's go to the Fred site, Fred CPI. So if we're looking at the Consumer Price Index, which what I'm looking at right now, so we see today's Consumer Price Index is 244.048. Let's just use, this is September, so let's use September of 1984. 104.7. And of course, you guys should know how to convert nominal into real. So we've got our formula here, real is equal to nominal times base over current. We're going to use our base being in today's dollars. So we have our 244.048 divided by our 104.7, the cave. That's a great music station, by the way. So let's see what we got here. Let's see how much these things are going to cost in today's dollars. So I need to find my calculator. 244.08 divided by 104.7. That times 100. So this would in essence be the same thing as studios charging $233 for a VHS copy. Studios charging $233 for a DVD. Studios charging $233 for a streaming copy, right? I mean, that's in essence what you could think of it as. Because that's VHS, DVD, and streaming are all to a degree the exact same thing. It's just the format slightly different. You're watching the movie on your own terms, in your own place, whenever you want to, however you want to do it. And in essence, they started off charging, like we said, in today's dollars, about $240 to buy a copy of the film? Would you guys buy any movie today for $240? I wouldn't either. It's ridiculous. And the reason that they started doing this was because of something called the first sales doctrine. So the first sales doctrine comes from a Supreme Court case in 1908. SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States. Came from a Supreme Court case in 1908. So what you had in 1905 is when this started. You had a retailer, I think it was Macy's, that was selling books. So you have this manufacturer making books for Christmas time. They sold them to Macy's. And the manufacturer said, we want you to sell these guys at 15 cents per book. Macy's bought the books and they said, no, we're going to sell these guys at 10 cents per book. This was the retail price. This is what they were selling them at. And of course, they bought them at something less than 10 cents. They didn't buy them at 15 and sell them at 10. The manufacturer suggested, hey, we suggested that you sell these at 15 cents. And Macy's says, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to sell them at 10. The manufacturer sues and says, you have to do what we say you're going to do. And Macy's says, no, we don't. And this goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, sure enough, you're right. Macy's, you've bought in the books. You own them. You can do whatever you want to do with them. You can give them away if you want to. You can sell them for a penny. You can sell them for a quarter. You can sell them for whatever you want to. They're your books. It's the first sales doctrine. Ownership transferred from the manufacturer to the retailer when you guys made the sale, and the retailer can do what they want to do with them. This is why when you're, like I said, when you're buying software, you have your end user licensing agreement, because when Microsoft came out with some software in the early 80s, they did not have an end user licensing agreement initially. They just sold the software. And people would take the software and they would distribute it to their friends, and Microsoft said, hey, you can't do that. And the guy said, yes, I can. I bought the software from you. I own it. I can do what I want to with it. And they went to court, and sure enough, the court said, yep, the guy's right. He can do whatever he wants to do with this copy of the software. You sold it to him. You don't own the copy. You don't own it anymore, Microsoft. This guy, George Smith or whatever the guy's name was, owns that piece of software. So that's why every single time that you buy any type of software now, it has an end user licensing agreement. You are in essence saying, I do not own this piece of software. I am renting it from you. Because if you download a video game and you put it on your computer and you buy the game, you can do what you want to do with the game. You can do whatever you want to do with it. You can sell it to other people. You can make additional copies. You can do whatever, right? So we have this first sales doctrine. The idea is that, well, if we charge about $100 per film, it's going to keep, once we sell them the copy, we have no more control of that movie. They can do what they want to do with it. They can sell it for whatever they want to. They can show it to whomever they want to. We want to ensure that we get as much for that movie as we can. Sorry. So, in essence, what you would see here is you would see the studios making substantial amounts of money from sales. Okay. Now, Paramount comes along and they kind of screw around with this. And they have Top Gun, a movie starring Tom Cruise, and I think there's actually a Top Gun 2 that's about to come out. Once again, franchise, right? They said, let's try something different. Rather than charging $100 or $80 or whatever, let's charge $12. So they're going to have something about 1/6 the price. Right, of these other movies. And let's kind of see what happens. So in essence, they're thinking, okay, we've got 1/6 the price, because the copies themselves don't cost that much to make, right? So they're thinking to themselves, okay, if I've cut the price into 1/6, I've got to sell 6 times as much, right, to get back to the same revenue is what they're thinking. And of course, actually I have to sell slightly more than that, right, because you have these things like variable costs and fixed costs that we as economists know. But in essence, you can kind of think of this in a broad spectrum of just basically revenue. So rather than selling 200,000 copies, which is what they would normally have done, at say $72, right, making about $14.4 million. They sold 3 million copies at $12. Made 36 million. And of course what they did is that they later changed this model when you had VHS and DVD rental places, and those are really almost basically out of existence by now. But in essence, what they would do is rather than sell the copy to your VHS rental store, they would lend the copy. And they would, in essence, engage in what's called some revenue sharing. So what you're doing in this revenue sharing, it works very, very similar to the way that it works with the box office and the distributor today with the regular movie. And we'll see how the revenue sharing works in more detail a little bit later on. But in essence, what happens is that you've got the studio, rather than selling the copy to the store, they lend them the copy, and then they have this declining revenue fraction that they're taking. So for example, in the first week, they might get, say, 80% of sales. This is the studio, right? And maybe in the second week, maybe they're getting, say, 60% of rental sales. On and on and on and on and on, down to the point where you got basically maybe 6 to 7 weeks in after the movie had been lent to the VHS rental store or the DVD rental store. Now the rental store owns it. All of the revenue from renting that going forward belongs to them. And the studio doesn't care anymore, right? And if you think about it from the rental store standpoint, it's a great model. They are in essence getting free DVDs and VHS copies of a movie that they can rent forever, right? It didn't cost them anything. They didn't have to go out and purchase the copies. They got lent the copies. They had to share some of the initial revenue from the first 6 to 7 weeks, and then after that they own the movie. So you have this whole system kind of changing again with DVDs. What time do we get out of this class? I really wish we'd just stick to the hours. You know what I mean? So we have this whole the same thing happening with DVDs, right? You have this, in essence, these American studios, and you've got Japanese electronics manufacturers. Kind of getting together, right? So in essence, what they're doing here is they're applying CD technology right, to movies. So the problem that you had here was one of storage space. There's only so much space you can put on that essentially CD. You have to find a way to compress it, right? And in fact, a lot of the movies that first came out when they were DVDs, you actually had to flip the movie over. Right? I have several old DVDs that I bought, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. You watch the movie, you got to stop, take it out, and flip it over again. It's not like it's a long movie. It's not a 4-hour-long movie. It's a 2-hour movie. They just couldn't get all that. They just couldn't get everything onto that first space, right? So if you have this compression, you have in essence this decline in video quality, and it makes it kind of, basically no good. So in essence, you have what's called this digital format war. And in essence, it's kind of between, say, Toshiba and Sony. Who's going to come up with the technology that can solve this problem? And the reason this was important is because previous to this, you had another format war, and you guys, like I said, you're not going to remember this. You weren't even born. It was between VHS versus Betamax, right? And in essence, what happened was that, if you think about VCRs and the VCR tapes, these guys are complements, right? They go together. You don't buy a VCR and not buy any VCR tapes. That doesn't make sense. You don't buy VCR tapes and not buy a VCR. The two have to go together. They're complements. So, which format do you use? Do you use VHS or do you buy Betamax? Because if I buy VHS and I bet wrong, then I've bought a piece of equipment and I've bought videotapes that aren't going to be good anymore. All the movies coming forward are going to be out on something else, Betamax. If I bet on Betamax, then it's the exact opposite, right? I've got this Betamax machine. I had friends that had a Betamax machine and they had Betamax tapes. And Betamax didn't win, VHS won, right? And so they were stuck with a machine that was old and clunky, a whole bunch of movies that you could only watch on that thing, on that one particular television, and that was it. So this format war between these two guys causes all kinds of problems. It delays the adoption basically of VHS and basically costs a lot of money because people are sitting there waiting to see which one's going to take hold. It's the exact same thing happening here, because they're two completely different formats. The same way that you have today with Blu-ray and what was HD DVD, right? Two completely different formats that would not work. Which one do you buy? So in essence, what happened this time is basically people got together in a meeting and they said, this is ridiculous. We need to choose one or the other. We don't want to waste time having Toshiba and Sony fight this out and not have people buy our product. We're going to choose Sony. We're going to choose the Sony method, right? And so in essence, that's what they did. Now, a couple of the studio heads did not go to this meeting. The studio head of Fox did not go. Why do you think that is? He said, there's no way I'm going to that meeting. That's exactly what it is. It's collusion. A bunch of studio heads got together and said, we need to choose one. We're going to throw all of our weight behind one of these methods, whichever one that is. And they all got together and they said, we choose this method. We choose the method for this. Sony. Right? And the guy from Fox says, I ain't touching that. That sounds like antitrust violations. Remember, the Sherman Antitrust Act says collusion can put you in jail. Right? It's not a matter of just a fine. You can actually go to jail for it. We'll pick it up from here on Wednesday.